me managing the poll, because that is really beyond my ken. But let me just tell you who you're going to hear from in the plenary. So we have got, very pleased that we've got Alison Ismail with us from the Department for Education, who is going to talk about the improvement plan, the SEND improvement plan. We've got Mark Hemmings, Head of Transformation at SEND Bristol. We've got Charlotte Mitchell, Assistant Director of Integration and Health from Rochdale. And finally, we've got Philippa Watts, our very own Philippa Watts, from the Council for Disabled Children and the National Children's Bureau, who's going to talk about our who's our health programme lead for this area. So we are really pleased that you're all here. If you haven't signed up to a workshop yet, and there are, I think, 9 of them, no, there are 11 of them. If you haven't signed up to a workshop yet, it isn't too late, but we really need you to, because then Adiba, who is on screen somewhere, can send you a link to it so that you can join that specific workshop. But you need to email Adiba, and I think, Adiba, if you can put that in the chat, your email address. If you still haven't got signed up to an event, a workshop, we would really like you to. They do look very interesting. Miri, can I just ask you, I know you sent me an email earlier, can you just say which ones we would have still got some gaps in, where we would encourage people to go to?
We have the Kent and Medway Key Worker Programme workshop. That's really interesting, about how they've worked with young people to develop their Key Worker programme and response. And we also have a workshop from young people in Manchester about piloting youth-led grant services for people with SEND, designed by people with SEND.
So that's workshop 7, and what was the other one?
Workshop
10.
10.
So Anna, go for 7.
Sorry.
Yes, carry on, Amanda.
Sorry to interrupt. Miri, we've just had in the chat, can a link be sent to somebody who can't find a link for the meeting? Can you or Adiba pick that up for us? Sorry, Anna, back to you.
No problem, Amanda. It's good to get, because we've got lots of people joining us still, and I'm nearly finished. So the other thing to note is our national webinar on Journey to Embedding ICSs is on March the 21st. So if you really want to know about ICSs, and I have to say that when I've seen Amanda and Christine do me diagrams of what's happening to the health system, I have found that incredibly useful, because I suspect that there are a few people as good as CDC are in joining the dots on these things and really understanding how it's now going to work, or it's now going to work in theory, and we hope in practice as well. So I think you'll find that very helpful. So that's on the 21st of March, sorry. And registration is now open, so if should be a link in the chat as well if you want to join that. Have I missed anything, Amanda?
I think you've done a very comprehensive job, Anna, and just leaves you to do the polling, I think.
So let's do the polling. So
there's a lovely QR
There's the
code.
Questions. So what you need to do, if you've got a phone, is hold it up to the QR code, or you can search www.mentimeter.com, and then you enter the code that's on the screen, and then you can, and I'm just going to do that now myself so I can make sure it's working, and then it should all go through. Everybody joined, everyone online? Oh, can we go back to there we go. So Miri is running this poll. First question. How well do you feel parent carers are involved at each stage of the commissioning cycle in your area? And it's great, it's because you can see people beginning to answer as that comes through.
So we need them to be in the top right, and they appear to be in the bottom left. So that's a kind of good try harder, is it, on people's homework?
Yes.
But what is brilliant is that that's why people are here, because they're recognizing that, and hopefully loads of the information that people will get this morning will really inspire them and give them some really concrete ideas about how they can take things forward, because they're just so creative and amazing. We love the work that we do with children, young people, especially, don't we, Anna? We love working with parents too, but I'm not going to lie, children, young people is it's always such good fun.
It is good fun, and it's always surprising. And I think as an adult, I'm often surprised, and I shouldn't be, at how insightful young people can be. So Amanda and I have both been involved in a senior recruitment at NCB recently, and we involved a panel of young people, as we do in all senior recruitments. And yet again, you can't pull the wool over the eyes of young people, especially collectively when they're checking each other. If they can smell BS, let's put it that way, and have really great insights on what they need and what they want. So this is what the whole conference is about. And
so is that sort of drawing to a close, Mary, in terms of people inputting? Mary's still on mute.
We've had 93 people now answering the poll, so perhaps we can move to the next question.
I think so, yes, please. So how well are children and young people themselves involved at each stage of commissioning cycle in your area? And I suppose you're right, Amanda, if it was all in the top right, we wouldn't really need this conference, would we?
No, we could just say, have a couple of hours back, you know,
Yeah.
well, like about 4 hours back, your job done, no worries. And I guess as well, it's, you know, it's not unsurprising that that people, you know, that's what we know, that is people generally struggle more with involving children, young people effectively. And, you know, and I think, you know, we have to be really honest about it. You know, it's not cheap. You know, to do it properly, it does take resource. It might not take, you know, it takes staff time to do it well. And people don't always, you know, we quite often get asked, you know, at the last minute to help people, you know, sort of get young people's views in, and it is quite often an afterthought. You know, people kind of know they have to do it, but they're working at speed, and they're, you know, they've got deadlines. So I think we're quite a long way away from having integrated it, you know, properly within all of our processes in the way that we would ideally like to.
It takes practice and skill as well. And I think that's unless you start doing it, you won't get better at it, which is a really obvious point to make. But so while Amanda's absolutely right, it needs the time resource in particular, but that does become easier to manage the more you do it, because when you bake it to your practice, then it doesn't become as an add-on, such as it doesn't feel so additional.
And also you kind of start to build up a bank of, you know, like, you know, one of the things we absolutely know from young people is they, you know, and I'm sure parents as well, but that, you know, they hate being asked the same thing, you know, more than once. So actually, if you can kind of build up a bank, and then sometimes, you know, you've got a good basis to start from. You don't always have to go back to the beginning. So should we move on from the polls, Miri? Do you think people have? Yeah.
Excellent. Am I handing over to you, Amanda, or am I introducing the first?
I think you're introducing the first speaker.
Excellent. In that case, it gives me absolute pleasure to introduce Alison Ismail from the Department for Education, who's going to, hello Alison, it's lovely to see you, who's going to be talking to us about the Send Green paper and the improvement plan. Over to you. I'm going to go on mute.
Thank you so much, Anna, and good morning, everybody. I think we might have somebody.
Can I just ask somebody to turn their mics off, please? We've got someone with their mic on. We can't hear Alison.
I think that's been sorted now.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder for everyone to turn their mics off, please.
Thank you very much, Anna and Amanda, and thank you very much, everyone, for welcoming me here today. It's a real pleasure to join you, and it looks like you've got an absolutely fantastic programme today, and I think we're just sort of starting to get into some of those really, really live topics. So I'm really very pleased to be with you. I'm going to, as Anna trailed, I'm going to talk a little bit about what follow-up we've been doing to our SEND and Alternative Provision Green Paper that was published last year, and hopefully give you a bit of a taster for our improvement plan, which is a follow-on from it. But I'll just to do some really quick introduction to myself first, and apologies because some of you I have met before, so apologies if you're hearing this for the second time. My name's Alison Ismail. I joined DFE in August last year to take up the role of Director for SEND and Alternative Provision. And I was absolutely thrilled to come over and pick up this role, which is obviously challenging and it's daunting, but it's really fantastic so far. Most recently, before I joined DFE, I was over at DEFRA, the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, working on food policy, which was a bit different. But actually, most of my career has been in and around the children and young people's health and education space. So I started off at DFE many years ago, working on schools improvement policy. Spent quite a bit of time at the Department of Health doing things like maternity policy, health inequalities. I spent some time out the NHS, integrating children's services for a big trust. And I have to say, what we were talking about in the session just now around how, I mean, I think it is families, but particularly children and young people can really smell the BS a mile off, and how important it is to really listen, because they may well have priorities and preferences that are not what you thought they were. I mean, that totally took me back to my time with the NHS. It's a really important angle. So, and that's a little bit about my background, and hopefully gives you a flavour of why I feel so thrilled and so privileged to pick up this role. I'm normally based in Sanctuary Buildings in Whitehall, but I'm at home today, as you can see, because I've been on school drop-off and pick-up, and I haven't. I meant to either blur my background or tidy up my backdrop, and you can see I haven't done either, but I kind of assumed you wouldn't mind my slightly chaotic family kitchen background too much. So I've got a few slides to talk to. I'll try to rattle through them fairly quickly so that we have a bit of time at the end for questions. I found when I do these previously or similar things, it's really hard to keep track of the chat, because, you know, in a good way, people are coming in with loads of comments. So I might need a bit of help just to pull out key questions at the end. But you know, I'd love to hear them. And what tends to happen is I pick up a few things separately with individuals afterwards as well, which is also great. So introduction. First of all, I think you would be forgiven for not having necessarily kept track of who our latest ministerial team is at DFE, because we've had, even by current standards or recent standards, an unbelievable amount of change. But the ministerial team we have at the minute began, they came in October half term when Rishi Sunak went to number 10. So it's been a great experience sort of getting to know them. And so we've got Gillian Keegan as our Secretary of State for Education, and Claire Coutinho, who's the junior minister with responsibility for SEND and AP, as well as for care, childcare, family policy, etc. And I have to say, I mean, there's something about when you start with a new set of ministers, you pick up what you're doing with them from first principles, you're testing where they're approaching it from. I have to say, both Gillian and Claire are absolutely red hot for everything to do with SEND and AP. They're really keen that we treat it as a really key priority. They're full of questions, they're full of enthusiasm. They both bring their own sort of angles to it. So I'd say for Gillian, partly because of her background as skills minister, she's rightly really pushed us to think about transitions and preparation for adulthood for children and young people with SEND. I'll come on to that a bit more. For Claire, she spent some time as Minister for Disabilities at the Department for Work and Pensions, and she's, again, rightly really pushing us about sort of what is our join up. Are we really working as hard as we possibly can with other government departments to think about this group? Recognise that if you're a child or their family with SEND or an alternative provision, you're not going to wake up in the morning and think what they're doing in DFE or what they're doing in DHSC. Your experience is going to be way more integrated than that. And I think both these ministers challenge us to respond in a much more holistic way, which is completely the right challenge. So both of them are, although the publication of our green paper, which was March last year, predated them coming into the department, they're extremely engaged with it and with what we're planning for our improvement plan. Some of you may have had a chance to meet them. Minister Coutinho in particular has got quite a programme of visits and meetings and things like that. So she's very keen to get out and meet people. So having had a lot of change on our ministerial team, I'm feeling really optimistic now about kind of really motoring on with them. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll just tell you a little bit about what's happening now and what my team's and broader DFE priorities are for the next little while. Loads of you will be familiar with the green paper, which, as I say, came out in March 2022, and it set out our plans to improve the experience and also the outcomes that we see for children and young people with SEND, and also those in alternative provision, which, as we know, is not a completely overlapping group, but we know that a very high proportion of those in AP do have SEND of some type. So that came out March last year. We had a really phenomenal response to it. I've never ever seen a consultation that had so much engagement, and so my teams have been very, very busy ever since that consultation closed in July, reviewing all the feedback, and I think more importantly just using it alongside obviously ongoing engagement with a lot of our partners to inform the next stage of delivering improvements for children and young people and their families. And that's what is going to form the core of our improvement plan, which will follow up the green paper. And we're committed to publishing that. We talk about early this year. So I mean, if I had a crystal ball and could tell you the exact date it will come out, I think I might turn into a betting woman, but I wish I did. But I'm very much hoping it will be out there shortly. There's a stage we need to go through where we get cross-government clearance for it, which is quite an intense process, but it's also really important in making sure we've got the backing of people like Department of Health and Social Care, Department for Work and Pensions, Department for Levelling Up, and also obviously the Treasury. So that's what we're going through at the moment. It was obviously, we had quite a lot of feedback. It was very important on the green paper to make sure that we got the accessibility right. So we're very much focused on the improvement plan to make the publication as accessible as possible to our audience with different formats, including a BSL format of the executive summary. So I just wanted to reassure you that that is a priority. Another thing just to mention that's going to be actually it does relate to the slide that talks about co-production. It's about a key proposal that was in the green paper and that we're kind of taking forward is around having a national implementation board for SEND and AP, which will have a membership that includes parents and representatives of children and young people themselves, which, as we've noticed, is not exactly the same as talking to families, and it's incredibly important. Voluntary sector representatives and sector leaders such as yourselves from across the systems, and as we've noted, that very much includes health, really to try and get that buy-in for the national system. And the other thing I would say about our proposals for the improvement plan is that we have been able to start to share them obviously in a kind of confidential and provisional way, noting that the exact document when it comes out may change. With some of our really close key partners. So, for example, we've been talking to Dame Christine Lenahan about what we're going to prioritise in that plan, and that's just an example of the really important ongoing work to make sure that we're really referring back to feedback and taking all the advice we can about how we land it. I did want to just talk a bit more about co-production. I mean, I feel like co-production has been a bit of jargon, if you like, at its worst, that's been around for a long time. But it is something that, your conference day is about voice, and it is something about how we can just not please everybody, but really, really take into account that range of views, and that's user experience, but it's also just the broad experience and priorities. And try to make sure that we're not making any changes to the system where we haven't fully understood the consequences and the impact for those it will affect. So I think co-production needs to be a really fundamental principle of the system here, because, and this is exactly what you're talking about today, if it's done properly, it's got potential to enable children and young people and their parents and carers to be genuinely valued partners in decision making. And I think that you know, that the mentor you did just there, which is like, it's not just about do you involve, it's about how meaningful that involvement is. That's what you need really to build more trust in the system. So we're really, really keen to strengthen that. It's easy to say, not necessarily quite so easy to do. But we're trying to do all we can to build co-production into sort of bake it in to all our policy making at national level, and engagement with system leaders like you, exactly as we've just been hearing, with children and young people and parent groups like FLARE, like the National Network of Parent Carer Forums, is absolutely key to that. And again, you know, I talked about our ministerial team, and they're really, really pushing us to demonstrate to them that we're taking that co-productive and consultative approach, not just now as we prepare the improvement plan, but baking it into all the kind of systems that we're setting up for the future. On the next slide, I mean, I've put a little bit here about our vision, I guess, for the system. And I mean, I always think when you read these sort of, you know, vision statements, mission statements, government documents, it's all great stuff, but what you're trying to do is really often, I think, identify a contestable statement, if you like, you know, something that anybody could disagree with, because otherwise it's easy to say things that sound great and it's important to state them, but to really get to the crux of the matter, you need to say something that could possibly be challenged, and that's how you kind of, you in the end flush out agreement and consensus. So it's hard to disagree with a society, the statement of a society where everyone can thrive. On the other hand, we know we don't have that at the minute. And so, I mean, this slide is just a reminder really about what that vision is. And this is what we've been exploring with our new ministers, who obviously weren't around for the Green Paper, but are now kind of taking up the helm. And it is about, I think, at its heart, an inclusive system that strikes the right balance between excellent and inclusive mainstream provision, but complementing a really strong specialist sector. That always looks slightly different to different people, but you know, that's, I think, what's at the heart of it. I would say I used a similar slide here to talk to a group of MAT CEOs last week, and they picked me up on the knowledge rich bit. So there was quite a lot of discussion you could have about that. But even so, this is a sort of a statement to stimulate discussion, I guess. And the second thing to mention here is around national standards. So national standards, I think, have got the potential to be a real, really to provide the framework of what we've said in the Green Paper about a more national system. Now, that's not to undermine or question the importance of sort of local ownership and local decision making, but it's about responding to the variation that we know we see in the system at the moment, hugely between areas, but even between just schools, for example, and taking a step towards greater consistency of provision. Obviously, that needs to be kept in balance with you know, an individualised approach. But the idea of national standards is to have a much more shared and collective idea about what good provision looks like and ordinarily available provision looks like. So we're working through options about, in practice, where we're going to start with developing national standards because we can't do them all at once. What sort of footing, statutory and non-statutory, they should be on. Really, as I say, going back to the theme about voice, advocacy, co-production, how we can make sure that we're obviously not just drafting national standards from Whitehall, but that they, you know, really bring in a full range of views about what good could and should look like, and how we, as I say, get that sort of standardised and much better understood, but obviously keeping that very, very critically important flavour about a needs-based approach and individual provision. Next one I'm going to mention is around workforce. So I think if we're honest, we would recognise that we didn't say as much in the Green Paper about the SEND workforce and AP workforce as we might have done if we were writing it now. I imagine that pretty much every sector over the last 12 months has felt pain on workforce issues. We know it's a really, really tight labour market, but obviously the impact of that for children and young people with SEND is incredibly serious, because we know how important it is to have a really strong and supported and flexible and capable workforce with really excellent leadership. And that's one of the things that came across really strongly in the consultation. I think, Anna has already talked about health and how important that relationship between the education and health and also the care workforces are. But I think particularly on the education side, we've heard a very clear message that it shouldn't be a situation where, well, that's just the responsibility of the SENCO in any given school. And that's where we want to make sure in the improvement plan we're really talking more meaningfully about the whole SEND workforce. So the role of all teachers in that, teaching assistants and others. I realise I'm talking quite slowly here, so I'm going to try and rattle through a little bit more. Next slide, I've got a little bit here about EHCP reform, and I think this is a really, really sensitive but also really important area. I think it was probably the big evident from the beginning of the Green Paper process that there was good consensus that people felt that the EHCP process should be made more consistent and also just more manageable and a better experience for everyone involved. So one of the things we're proposing to try and achieve that is to establish something that's much closer to a common template. So backed by common processes, common guidance, and also, and I think this just picks up what we were saying at the beginning, based on a much more holistic view of children and young people who need plans. Digitisation is likely to be a kind of next step on that. We know that actually people are in loads of local areas are motoring ahead with digitisation, but it's a question of how can we kind of bring that to all areas. This is really, really difficult stuff, but it's also so important. And my team who are working on this now are very largely those who've been working on it for some time since the beginning of the Green Paper process, have been hearing firsthand from families and different groups about their experiences of the EHCP process, and are really, really keen to identify those areas where there's actually fantastic common practice at the minute, and to kind of set us up to expand that. So, I mean, on EHCPs, I'd say if you're aware that something that you think is great, that something that's happening in your local area that's really effective and you think we should be seeing more widely, then we would love to hear about it. My next slide is about preparation for adulthood. So I mentioned that this is one which is really, really close to our ministers' hearts. And, again, really hard to disagree how important preparation for adulthood is. Our Secretary of State in particular has talked to us about how, clearly support for children and families while they are children in that 0 to 25 range is really important, but also that it's absolutely our role to be supporting children so that when they become adults, they've got the right support, right forward plans, is equally important. And actually that can be some of the most sort of scariest, most fragile moments for families. I think, if I'm honest, when I came to this last year, I was it wasn't I didn't agree with this, but I'm so used to thinking about early intervention, 0 to 5, that's where you spend your marginal pound. And we know how strong the evidence is there, but I think it's about that kind of complementary approach, thinking about that whole kind of life course, and how we need to combine that really early support, early intervention, with a really strong focus on transitions, well-managed transitions and preparation for adulthood. And really kind of bring to life that post-16 element, including FE, HE, different types of employment options. I mean, there's loads I could mention here, but the sorts of things that we're kind of focusing on, and loads of you will be familiar with, is things like the Careers and Enterprise Company that's providing training and support to help schools and colleges, SENCOs, other sorts of settings, support young people with SEND with their career planning in a really kind of properly tailored way. We're investing another 18 million in the supported internships programme. So we're aiming to double the amount of internships for young people with SEND over the next 3 years. I mentioned working with Department of Work and Pensions, and that's one thing we're doing with them, for example, is working on their pilot for adjustments passports, which is another tool I think potentially that can really smooth transitions for children and young people. So there's quite a lot underway there, but I think, you know, as I talked about how it works when you settle in with a new ministerial team, this is one where they've really pushed and challenged us in a way that I think is great. Okay, final 3 things I'm going to mention, and I will try and 2 things actually, I'll do swiftly. One is around accountability, and I think, you know, we could talk about this all morning, all day, all week. But one of the very, very strong things that came through from the consultation is that however good or kind of logical, coherent, sensible your framework is, if there isn't real clarity and accountability about who's delivering what, it's not going to give those experiences and those outcomes that we're looking for. So to really kind of turbocharge here, but also I think just stimulate that sort of local join up. So I guess it's a combination around clear responsibilities, but also shared accountability where you've got a number of agencies working together. We're going to be establishing local area SEND and AP partnerships that bring together education, health and care partners with local government to co-produce a local inclusion plan with families. And the idea there is that it's going to set out how the local area is going to meet the needs of its children and young people, again, in line with national standards. So you're always back to that local national balance. Another thing, obviously, in the mix is the new area SEND inspection framework, which places greater emphasis in the outcomes that are achieved for children and young people with SEND, looking particularly closely at the under 5 group, but also going back to different ends of the life, the different stages of the life course, the 16 to 25-year-old group, and also it includes AP for the first time, which I think is really positive. We talked in the green paper, and this is another one we want to take forward, about better use of data and introducing inclusion dashboards for that whole spectrum of 0 to 25 provision. Again, it's about finding a sort of light touch and consistent but really genuinely useful way to share that information and capture how local areas are doing with this. Another couple of things to mention under this sort of category. One is about tribunal. So, I mean, everybody, I think, recognises this as an area where it's not necessarily working well for anybody. We know tribunal appeals have risen by, I think, nearly 30% in the last year. They're up about well over 200% since 2014. And we heard through the consultation how lengthy and stressful for everybody that tribunal process can be, and yet we know that many families feel they need to pursue it. We know that greater use of mediation could be a really important tool here. It's effective, I think, in about 3/4 of cases. So we propose in the green paper to make mediation a mandatory step. This is obviously quite a sensitive one. Not everybody is on board with that, but it's going to be one of the things that we're looking really closely at. Again, just in that trying to stimulate earlier intervention, de-escalate some of the kind of worst conflicts we see here, and improve the experience for everyone who's working in it or affected by it. And then my last slide is about financially sustainable system. Sometimes I think actually I should probably reorder my slides so that I start with this, because I think it's, no matter how you're looking at the issue, we can talk for a long time about how important it is to improve the outcomes of children and young people with SEND and an alternative provision, and make sure they and their families have much better experience, and everyone in the system does. And that's absolutely true. But we also know part of the problem at the moment is that we've got a lot of local areas where their local SEND systems have become financially unsustainable. And you'll all be familiar with this, but the high needs budget has increased by over 50% since 2019. Local authorities' deficits are now in the territory, I think, of over £1 billion. And you know, the irony here, and that is sort of difficult for everybody, I think, is that we're not seeing marked improvement or in experience or in the outcomes we see for that. So we will expect the improvement plan, alongside all that emphasis on things we can do to improve outcomes and experience, a clear programme to seek to get the whole system on a much more financially sustainable footing, and to make use of that investment, if you like, in the high needs budget in a way that's way more effective for everyone involved. So children, families, but everyone involved in supporting them as well. So some of that is about taking action to address the issue, the supply of places. So as I said at the beginning, I haven't succeeded in completely following the chat, but I know that the point's been raised about just making sure that in all local areas you've got that right balance of readily available special places alongside mainstream provision. We're also going to publish a response to the recent consultation on the National Schools Funding Formula. And really what we want to do, I mean, the phrase interest convergence is a little bit of jargon, isn't it? But just try to align all those priorities around improving outcomes, around a much better experience, and around financial sustainability, so that we can really, really transform what we offer for children and families over the coming years. Those are the end of my slides. I'll stop there. I think I always begin by saying I'll be quick, and I'm not, but it's great to have had the opportunity to run through those with you. And if we've got time for any questions, I'm really happy to get into them.
Thanks, Alison. I think we actually have run out of time for questions because I don't want to cut short any of the other speakers. But you've covered a question for me in briefly. Can I suggest, Alison, and thank you so much for that presentation. That's a lot to cover, and those slides are really helpful. People have access to those. But can I suggest, Alison, that if you have a look at the questions in the chat and are able to answer those in the chat, then they get held there and everybody can see the answers to them. Amanda, do you think that's the best way forward?
Yeah, probably, just so we don't run out of time. And I think especially that there was a sort of quite a long discussion about kind of inclusion in relation to the national standards and sort of concern about children with autism currently not being successfully included in mainstream schools. So if there's anything more you can say about that, Alison, I think people will be incredibly grateful.
I will do. So what it probably mean, actually, because I need to head off fairly shortly, is that I'll go through them later in the day, try and pull out those key themes. And it might be that rather than posting back in the chat, I send you guys something by email that you can then cascade if that works. So I'll work out the best way to do it.
That's absolutely fine. And we'll save you time, Alison. We'll send you the questions. Don't worry about it.
Okay, if you're able to do that, yeah, that would be wonderful. All right. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Alison. Speak soon. Take care. Okay, so our next speaker, I'm really pleased to be able to introduce, is Mark Hemmings, who's Head of Transformation for SEND in Bristol. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning. Welcome to our session on our efforts to improve co-production and the strategic parent-carer voice through our Key Worker project. But although it's centred on the Key Worker project, we think that the experiences are transferable, actually. As I say, my name's Mark Hemmings. I'm Head of Transformation for SEND in Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire, ICB. And I'll just ask my colleagues to introduce themselves. So, Lindsay, if you're there.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Cox. I'm Senior Project Officer for Learning Disabilities and Autism, also in the ICB with Mark. And I project managed a lot of the Key Worker project.
Thank you. And Rachel?
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Rachel Truman and I run the South Gloss Parent Carer Forum in South Gloucestershire.
Thank you. And Kenton?
Morning, everybody. I'm Kenton Mee. I chair North Somerset Parent Carer Forum. Good to see you all. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks. So first of all, I hope you're enjoying these photographs as much as I do. They're a variety of our children and young people with neurodiverse challenges, but they're all happily learning and enjoying themselves, but more about them later. So the way we're going to do the session is I'm going to set the scene. Rachel and Kenton will describe the parent carer involvement and the impact that that had on the project. Lindsay will tell you about how we went about it in a bit more detail, especially the kind of contentious bits, because we all know it's sometimes a bit of a bumpy ride. And finally, I'll just kind of pull it together and tell you about the outcomes. So it's a kind of mixture of co-production, operational success, but ultimately it's about building on this to provide better system-wide co-production and a stronger parent-carer strategic voice in the future, and ultimately better outcomes for this lot in the photograph. So moving on, a bit about us. So Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire, I'm sure you'll know where we are in the country. We call ourselves BNS, I can't even say it now, BNSSG for short. We've got a population of about 1 million people, 3 local authority areas, relatively affluent, but with significant areas of deprivation. And over the last 5 years, we've had 3 SEND local area reviews, inspections. We've had 3 re-inspections, and currently we've got 2 accelerated progress plans and an improvement plan underway. We're now wrestling with the new inspection framework. So thank you, Alison and colleagues. We're on tender hooks every Monday morning again. And we've got 3 parent carer forums, which we work very closely with. We've developed co-production charters at different times with each, but the strategic voice was limited and still is to a certain extent. And while we were quite good at engagement, co-production's been slow to take off. So
Is that just me, or is Ian frozen for everybody?
Unfortunately, it is not us, it is Mark.
Mark, sorry.
Is anybody else from Mark's team unfrozen and able to pick up for him, I think is the question.
Okay, I'm wondering if it's best if I carry on with my slide because I was next. So
Yes,
are
please.
you okay to? Brilliant, thank you. So first of all, it's really lovely to be invited to talk about the Parent Carer Forum and how we've all been involved in the Key Worker project. And it's something that, that talking on behalf of myself and Kenton, that we're all really proud of to be part of. But as Mark was letting you know about how we operate in the BNSSG area, you know, we've got 3 local authorities, 3 forums, and we all share the same ICB and the same health providers. I just want to highlight to you all the amount of work that we've all done previously to this project work, because there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. There's a lot of work that we've done to build really positive partnership working, you know, where we built that trust and that respect for one another to work together. We have regular meetings with Mark and the Director of Children's Services of our Community Health Services in our local area. And we have really good, open and very honest conversations. And I think that's what has really helped us is the forums in the BNSSG. And also what we've done is we've recognised how difficult it was for us to actually cut Mark into 3. And so what we've done as forums is we've joined together, we've rebranded ourselves, and you'll see the little logo on our slide. We have the 3 forums working together across health, and so we try to do all our meetings together. And what that also does is we add all the voices of the families that we work with, and we collect them individually from our own local areas, and we then put them to the bigger voice and combine them so that we've got the BNSSG parent carer voice. And we believe that working this way has really helped us to strengthen our partnership with each other. But what we're noticing as we're starting to get involved more with even more new people and new teams, because Mark and Lindsay can't be involved in everything that we do, we do find that people may have slightly different views on what co-production actually means. And so the easiest way we try to look at co-production is in the following 3 areas, which I've got a little image on the slide. We call it strategic co-production, where we've got a mixture of different representation with lots of different skills, knowledge, experience, ranging from different practitioners, commissioners, directors. The important thing are people with lived experiences and the voluntary sector. And we're all looking to design and evaluate a system-wide service. There's the operational co-production, with a mixture again of different people and their experiences, but we're looking more at the operational aspects of that service. So it could be in the Key Worker project, we were looking at the designing of the leaflets of the service or the videos or getting involved in interviews. And then there's the individual co-production, where it's that person-centered way of working with that individual and the family to help them support their own outcomes and set their own outcomes and to be involved in their own review. And all three types of co-production are all very important, and that's what we all strive to do in our local area. But what we find for co-production to be really effective, everyone, and I mean everyone, so it's not just us as parent forums, it's everybody who is involved, needs to be involved right from the start. And I think that's really, really crucial. Sometimes we've been invited sort of maybe after the 4th or 5th meeting that's already happened. To me, that's not co-production, and then we don't feel we own it. We don't feel we're involved. We like to be involved right from the start to help set the agendas and help to set the plans going forward. And another factor for true co-production, and to get that collective views of the parent carer voices and the children and young people with lived experiences, is that it does need to be resourced and funded appropriately, because there's a lot of work involved in going out there to get the voices and making them that collective voice. And our ICB recognised the importance of this and funded us as parent carer forums to be involved. So I'm going to hand over to Kenton, who is going to explain how we were involved in the Key Worker project.
Thanks, Rachel. So key areas of parent carer forum involvement in our Key Worker project. From the start, we sort of set up a steering group of all stakeholders based on their experience and knowledge, bringing together CAMS, social care, health, local authority, along with our parent carer forums. We as parent carer forums then chaired the steering group, helping set agendas, terms of reference. We were fully involved in challenging discussions and decisions around who would host the Key Worker team. In the end, we decided that the CCG and ICB would be the best fit for our area, but that would be different depending on which area you're in. We were fully involved in decisions around the team structure, pay grades, job descriptions, and really sort of getting through the real nitty-gritty detail of what we expected our teams to be doing as the job roles were developed. We engaged with our families, particularly those with lived experience, and particularly with children and young people through their parents and carers. So as a parent carer forum network, we have lots of links with parents and carers that have children with lived experience of the journey through, and sometimes it's really difficult to get their voice coming through, particularly when they're in quite a vulnerable position themselves. And actually sometimes a really good route is to tap into that parent carer knowledge of how their child and young person has coped during different stages of their journey and their experiences. We arranged for 2 parents to share their lived experience with the steering group, and provided the opportunity for our steering group to ask questions really and really explore the journey that our families locally had been on and the challenges they'd faced, the impact that had then on their lives, and considering how the Key Worker team would really make a difference and benefit families. We were fully involved in all the interviews for the Key Worker team lead and also all the team, which was really positive to really explore you know, how different personalities, different experiences could shape a team and really bring a positive sort of feel to the team with their working with the children and young people. And it's important to note that we were able to get children and young people involved with that as well, and that was really positive to have their input, which does often really change the shape of our thinking around how different individuals will work with our young people. And then the steering group partnership helped create a local area induction training programme for the new key workers, which also ensured that we linked them into the parent carer support that's out there, but also the knowledge of parent carer forums and the wider networks in the area. Next slide, please. So we've got the positives and challenges that we faced, and I think we're all very aware that co-production really does come with many challenges. So I'll cover off some of the challenges first, and then we'll look at some of the positive side. So we had some disagreements, most notably with service needs becoming a focus rather than perhaps a system-wide approach. And this was particularly apparent where services were struggling with perhaps their own finances, their staffing and their priorities, and actually being able to draw it back to that strategic project outcomes and refocus on the children and young people was really important. We found we had different understanding of what the key worker service was, you know, and I think different people coming in at different stages really showed a very differing understanding, perhaps where they'd just seen some of the headlines of the project and not really understood the heart of the project. So we had to continually go back perhaps and revisit things, and this impacted both on sort of timelines and the project progress, as we were just keeping everybody in the loop, up to speed, to really get the project moving forward with everybody taking ownership. I mentioned about the hosting of the project earlier. Again, that was a real sort of challenging discussion, certainly early on in the project, around where the best fit would be for our local area, to be able to bring that challenge and perspective to all the different system partners. Asking families to speak at our session opened up traumatic memories, and I think it's worth really saying this as we connect particularly with those that have had quite traumatic experiences. It is really difficult, and sometimes by asking them to share their experiences, we can open up some real bad memories for them that can mean that they relive those experiences. And I think it's just being mindful as we work with parents and carers and children and young people that we engage them at the right time. And I think this comes back to strategically engaging with children and young people was a challenge. And I think that was a project-wide challenge that we hadn't identified at an early stage those children and young people with experiences already. So although we've got Bernardos in the area that work with a lot of children and young people, and we're able to bring them in and bring their voice in, we struggled with those that had specific lived experience around the key worker project and the target children and young people that it was for. And I think, you know, that's where advanced work in making sure that we are engaging with our children and young people across the system really helps to bring their voice in at the right time, depending on the project you're working on. And not everybody has worked in a co-productive way before, and I think there was a lot of learning required in terms of actually how do we get to this to work. You know, services are often used to doing their own thing, taking ownership and driving a project forward, and suddenly involving other people is quite challenging and is a very different way of working. From a parent carer forum perspective, we did feel that there was a push probably more towards children and young people within the project rather than the sort of whole family experience, and that then, you know, just needed sort of reshaping and reforming to ensure that we had the voices of all that the project was there to impact. And I think, you know, one of the biggest challenges for us within the parent carer forums, as well as all the stakeholders, was really to get it to work properly. The time commitment and the capacity within the system was a real issue, you know, just in terms of the meetings that we had very early on. We had to double the number of meetings in the diaries because we needed to ensure that we were making the progress that we wanted. And you know, that is a time commitment, both on us as parent carer forums as well as all the professionals involved. If we're going to do it properly, we've got to give it the time, the space, and be prepared for things to take that much longer. So positives, I'm aware that time is ticking on, but I will try and rattle through these positives, which really comes back to sort of key enablers as well, which really help the system to work together. So being involved right from the start, so we could discuss the structure and where the service would sit was really, really important. And I think it's worth saying within this, setting an example from the top of organisations around co-production and working with parent carers does make a huge difference in then how that filters through. And particularly for this project, you know, the proposal had gone in initially, perhaps without quite so much co-production. However, when we set up the steering group, we were very clear, everything is on the table, everything is up for discussion, that nothing is set in stone, you know, and that is what true co-production is. It's looking at what is the best fit, taking it right back to the beginning. And that was a very positive way of getting the project started. System-wide thinking, bringing focus to the needs of children and young people, person and family. And bringing our area together, so bringing all the 3 different social care teams together from the 3 different local authorities was really important and actually beneficial to the system as a whole, as we all came together and shared our experiences of how the system is working perhaps differently in different areas, actually bringing that together and thinking of best practice to share across the 3 areas and how the key worker team could really make a difference in that. It's worth saying that building trust and relationships is really important. And what we've built through this key worker project has been really positive, and we just know that that will then be able to be taken forward to other projects, that we're actually building that commitment and that desire to do co-production and do it well across the system. So I think just having that joint understanding, I think I've touched on before, is really important. Bringing everybody together, having transparent conversations, not being afraid to sort of keep everything to ourselves or hold things tightly, but actually being open and honest. Where things are confidential, they're confidential, but actually having those open conversations is really important. We were on the journey together as equal partners, fully involved in the decision making, and I think that really needs to be a highlight of this whole project. Having that equal partnership, equally involved in decisions, makes a huge difference in how we push it forward. And actually the parent carer forums taking on the chairing of the steering group really helped convey this commitment and convey the sort of partnership working and the parent carer voice in there. You know, we do need to sometimes perhaps overcompensate, so that actually, you know, by putting us as chairs of the project was almost an overcompensating to say to everybody in the room, yes, we really do value our parent carer voice. It is really important, and we are going to put that as a central feature of moving this project forward. And then as the system takes that approach forward, it doesn't mean we necessarily need to be chaired, because we become valued as equal partners and decision makers within the system. And I think Rachel touched on the funding side earlier. Funding is incredibly important. You know, if we're going to release time, which is the other important aspect of doing co-production well, actually funding those that are involved, and we were well, the funding that came with the Key Worker project for the parent carer forums to be involved was a real enabler in us being able to give the time that was needed to develop the project. Including people with lived experience, I think, you know, that is absolutely crucial whenever we're developing any project. That's a key part of what we bring as parent carer forums, is the lived experience of our parent carers, to ensure that that is central to the thinking for any service delivery. And I think I'll probably just end on the whole family approach was really important. And it was really positive from our key worker team that have just set up, in that they recognised that actually that whole family approach that we've set into the team is really getting embedded into what they're doing, and is just reflected back to us that actually the whole family being sort of considered in service is really important. So I'm just aware of time, so I will hand over to Linz.
Thank you,
Just to let you know, Lindsay, you've only got 5 minutes left, I'm afraid, and there's a few questions in the chat as well.
Okay, I'll see if I can speed through this. So I'm here to talk about the my approach to the project. So my first action was setting up the project steering group, which was an essential part of the governance of the project. And it's where all of our key decisions were made, our actions to drive the project forward were allocated, and our identified risks were monitored. Then throughout the project, the steering group was underpinned by the terms of reference, which set out the remit and responsibilities of the group, the membership, the minimum quorum for the decision making, and the periodic review periods for the terms of reference, so that they could remain relevant and that any changes to the structure or membership were documented. Meetings were initially held on a monthly basis, but these increased in frequency, as Kenton alluded to, and we had a catch up every 2 weeks, which enabled critical decisions to be made much more quickly rather than needing to wait another month. It also provided us with time for more robust decision about key enablers such as hosting of the team, the structure, the banding and the job descriptions. The co-produced approach to the Key Worker project involved our parent carer forum colleagues taking on the chairing of the steering group, as they've talked about previously. There was system-wide membership from across the ICS, which included the ICB, our Mental Health Acute Trust, local authorities and other VCS organisations, and that wide range of membership from across the system brought with it lots of opportunities, but also the potential for conflict where there might have historically been challenging relationships between partners. This needed to be managed to ensure that decisions made reflected the views of the whole group, and I supported this by ensuring that the group were fully informed of various options to drive discussions forward. We also took a collaborative approach to reporting, which was required by NHSE at the end of quarters 1, 2 and 4, although quarter 3 had been stood down due to the system pressures at that time. I managed this process for obtaining the updates for each section, and I circulated it to the project steering group, which meant the updates were fully collaborative as well. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the timeline of actions sitting behind the process of developing the key worker team, which started with the formation of the project steering group in May 2021, and then each block being another part of the foundation of the team. So it tracks the development of the project plan, the chairing arrangements, and the discussions about the hosting. In terms of the hosting, many opinions have been expressed within the steering group meetings, and there were strong ideas and specific options. I noted all of these and I pulled them into an options appraisal, which listed the strengths and weaknesses of each one and enabled the group to consider whether the weaknesses of the specific models fell outside of the tolerances for the project. For example, they needed the team to be independent of all other services, and how could they do that if they were employed directly by one of them? The options appraisal supported the final decision making around employing the key workers within the ICB, and it allowed the development of the initial team leader and team administrator roles. Then another fully collaborative exercise was the design and development of the key worker job descriptions. So the team leader and administrator posts had been developed based on existing roles within the CCG, which were agreed quite early in the process. But the challenge was to develop the key worker roles. As they were intended to be new, it was more difficult to base them on a single job description. So members of the steering group worked collaboratively to obtain job descriptions for several different roles across health and social care and outside of BNSSG as well, which I then reviewed and used various sections of which aligned with what I knew the role needed to cover. I developed them into 2 job descriptions, one for the key worker post and the other for a senior key worker post, and presented them to the steering group for further discussion and amendment. And when we'd agreed our final versions, I managed the internal recruitment processes around these, including gaining banding approval and sign off before they can go to NHS, before they could be advertised on NHS jobs. And I think that this reflected the importance of having a project manager in place to ensure that the momentum was maintained. Next slide, please.
Linz, can I, sorry to cut you off, can I suggest that we could, in view of the time, we go to the last slide, because just so I can pull it all together. Would that be all right? Is that okay, Miri? If we go to the last slide.
The last slide in our presentation, yeah?
Yes. Yeah. And next one. Yes, so the key worker team's in place. And I just wanted to bring us back to this lot, really, because ironically, we'd prefer not to have a key worker team supporting our young people because we don't want them to get into crisis situations. And And that's where this lot comes in, really, because these, as I said at the beginning, are children, young people who've got their own challenges from across our area, but they're enjoying themselves at a variety of our needs-led projects. And these projects are activities that help both young people and their families at a much earlier stage as their needs start to emerge, and that, as well as being supportive, are fun and informative as well. But of course, we only know what to provide and when to provide it and where to provide it with a strong strategic parent voice and effective co-production. So it kind of underlines the lessons that we've learned from our key worker project experiences. Engagement and co-production is an ICB organisational priority, but it's easy to say, isn't it? But much harder to deliver. We want our young people and parent carers involved from the beginning of things, and we have joint bi-monthly meetings that include ICB colleagues, community health providers, parent carer reps, where we explore kind of strategic and operational issues and challenges. And I think Kenton or Rachel mentioned that our new CEO and directors are meeting with parent carers to hear their lived experiences firsthand. That's really important, I think. And we need to make sure that they're involved across all levels of the ICB, especially at strategic groups, which, you know, Kenton alluded to the time challenges around that and the need for funding to actually be able to achieve that. So we're looking carefully about how we fund our parent carer forums so that we can develop them into sustainable professional organisations. So we've got like a two-way conduit from the strategic kind of decision making into the parent community and back again. And I was kind of thinking about this last night, and I'm minded of a phrase, a sentence that you will all be aware of, I'm sure, about "from little acorns mighty oaks do grow," because I think that's where we are. We're an acorn that's sprouting and growing, but we need to take that learning forward now. It's been a small but really important step, and we want to build on that experience and use it to ensure that we get an even stronger parent carer voice in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark and team. There's a huge amount in there, and I was just sort of flicking through the slides that unfortunately we had to miss, but I know they'll be available, so apologies for cutting you off. There's some really interesting comments and questions in the chat, particularly around the profile of the children that you've been working with and the profile of the parents too. So if you've got time, it'd be great if you could answer them in the chat. I don't think we have got time to answer them in the main forum. That's right, Amanda. I'm seeing you nodding at this. So in which case, thanks once again, really well done. That was a brilliant presentation, lots of inspiring as well as thought-provoking ideas there. Can we move on, however, to Philippa Watts, to Rochdale, to Charlotte Mitchell, our Assistant Director of Integration and Health at Rochdale Borough Council. Lovely to see you again, Charlotte, and over to you.
And we should probably just mention before Charlotte starts that the last time we saw Charlotte in person was at the Children Young People Now Awards, where Rochdale were awarded award for their work on scent. So congratulations to Charlotte for that.
Yeah, really proud to have been involved in that. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you. Pure joint effort, though. It's not all on me. So thank you to everyone that was involved. And I'd also like to introduce Carol Lindridge, who is the star of the show. Carol is our co-chair of our Parent Carer Voice and will be co-presenting with me today. I think it's important that, you know, we do this together as we do everything else together. So welcome to Carol as well, who I'm sure will introduce herself in a minute. Carol's going to start today, but I'll just do a quick introduction before we get going. My name is Charlotte Mitchell. I'm an Assistant Director for Integration and Health in Rochdale, working with the local authority and our health system. And I also have been very heavily involved in the development of GM ICS's transition through to ICS from CCG, as previously I was in a commissioning capacity. So we're going to get going. This is going to be a very practical presentation. When I hear things, I like to find tools and tips and things that I can take away with me. So we're hoping that it will be interesting to you as you would describe our journey. So I'll hand over to you, Carol, for now.
Good morning, everyone. as Charlotte said, my name's Carol Lindridge. I'm the co-chair of the Rochdale Parent Carer Voice. I'm really privileged. I've been with the Parent Carer Voice since its inception, since 2002, and I've watched the co-production journey in Rochdale grow. And we're now at a point where we have co-production, in fact collaboration, I think more than co-production, and it's a really, really exciting journey to go on. Can we have our next slide, please, Mary? Right, so welcome to Rochdale. I think unfortunately for us, Rochdale doesn't have the greatest reputation nationally, but we're all here to change that. And as Amanda already mentioned, we have already started to change that in a really good way. But we do, as a town, have some really, really great principles that have been around for a very long time, with the birthplace of cooperation. And I think that's evident in quite a lot of the stuff that goes on in our town. And we also have the most amazing town hall, of course, which I think is the envy of a lot of people. In Rochdale, we have a sort of an ethos that SEND is everybody's business. We work really, really hard with all our partners, all our families, children and young people, to ensure that everyone feels involved. When we come into this world, we're all born belonging. And sometimes situations, our own family situations, or things that go on in the systems that aren't easy to change, make some people feel not belonging. And it's our job, I think, as the Parent Carer Forum, as partners to all the people that we work with in our local area, to make sure that we bring everybody back to that original thing where we all belong. So we have a few sort of principles in the way that we work in Rochdale. And I think one of the main things is we always ask somebody to think, would this be good enough for our child? And even those people who aren't parents or have, you know, friends, relatives who have children, or, you know, in larger parts of their family. And I think it's really, really important to have that principle and to think ahead. You know, we try in Rochdale, as you know, as our previous colleague said, to work from a really, really early age, to start with early help and intervention, to start in a needs-led process. But then we have to think further on, you know, what happens to these children when they get to school age? What happens to them? You know, what do they want to be when they're 20, when they're 30, when they're 50? Most children and young people just want what we all want. They want to be happy, they want to have a house, they want to have a relationship, they want to have a job. And so those are all the things that, you know, we're working really hard on in Rochdale. So our demographics, I'll just go really briefly through this because a really important bit in the presentation comes later. So as I said, for Rochdale, we have some barriers already for some of our children and young people to start with. We have a much higher national average of children and young people in poverty who might have free school meals, who have SEND, who may suffer some other hardships at home. So it's just a little background about some of the things that we're working with our families. Can we have the next slide, please, Mary? So I'm sure lots and lots and lots of you have already seen this this poem, Welcome to Holland, but I think it's a really good description for those of us who might not have had any lived experience in our families of children and young people with SEND. And it's that sort of description of a journey that everybody's so excited when they're going to have a baby, and they think about all the things that are going to happen, all the amazing things they're going to do as a family, you know, the places they're going to do, and the things they're going to do. And then the journey doesn't go quite as you expect it. And for some people, this is really, really devastating. You know, you think you're going to Italy and seeing all these amazing things, and then you land and you end up in Holland, and it's something completely different. And it's scary, but it's not bad. It's just different. And I think, you know, when you learn to embrace it, and you are well supported, and you get good services, then things look much better. And it's a really, really exciting and invigorating place. And you see lots of different things that you wouldn't necessarily have seen if you went to Italy. So when we look at intersectionality, this is like a really, really big thing, I think, for all areas, and it's particularly important for us in Rochdale, because when we look at our demographics, we do have a lot of families who live in poverty, and if you look at the diagram there, it's almost a kind of a cyclical thing that happens. It's, you know, the proportion of children with SEND who are living in poverty increases with age for all types of SEND. Children who live in poverty are more likely to develop some forms of SEND. They may have some behaviours that challenge, and lots of these might be due to their extenuating family circumstances. We sometimes see in our families that there is a sort of a cycle. I think if you're born into a family with some difficulties, quite often this then continues through generations. And obviously all the work that we're doing in Rochdale is aiming to stop that. But there are lots of other things that we need to consider when we're looking at that as well. Next slide, please, Miri. So, as Charlotte said right at the beginning, we go on this journey together. The parent carer voice and the families you represent are involved in pretty much everything that goes on in Rochdale. It's a very exhaustive task, but it's really, really, really worthwhile and very, very rewarding. And there is a philosophy within Rochdale that everybody is equal partners. We have really regular meetings with our Assistant Director Charlotte and also our Assistant Director for Early Help in Schools, weekly meetings to sort of brainstorm and troubleshoot as we go through. And I think the important thing to remember is no one piece is more important than the other. And if you look at the diagrams there, the situations that work the best are where the teams are all equals.
Thanks, Carol. Okay, so I'm going to talk now around our strategic journey, and this journey started with a conversation that I had with my director at the time, and she was getting quite frustrated with our lack of progress around SEND, and she said to me, you need to integrate SEND and you need to integrate it quickly. So I went away scratching my head and emailed the Council for Disabled Children and had a conversation with Amanda Allard. And I said to Amanda Allard, am I being too ambitious in thinking that we can integrate our whole SEND system? Have people done it? Are people doing it well? How are they doing it? And she said to me, Charlotte, you can never be too ambitious. And that was the start of a beautiful relationship with the Council for Disabled Children. So I went away and I began to reflect upon how do we utilise what we've got? How do we think about where we are and how do we move forward? So my background is in working with children and families, and so I'm quite good at facilitating people, bringing people together to identify their own solutions, as you would do when working with families. So we began to think about how we adapt this approach for the work around SEND. And actually, if you consider a trauma-informed evidence-based practice, it tells you to create a place of safety, to collaborate, to improve, to have a clear vision. And when you align the theory around trauma-informed care, trauma-informed commissioning, it's not very dissimilar to co-production. It's about creating a clear vision. It's about being results-driven. It's about being ambitious, having focused leadership and having open communication with people. So we drew upon trauma-informed care to think about how do we develop our models within Rochdale. And what this did was to step into a system that's very bruised, where people are feeling very let down, and to kind of nurture that relationship in a different way than we've ever done before. So we created an environment for collective moral purpose, sharing that work together. We need to come up with the solutions together. We need to move forward. Now, this didn't work and wouldn't work with a few corridor conversations. We knew that we needed to have a robust governance structure around this. So we drew upon some NHS England, a small pot of money, to work on developing a SEND Alliance. Now, what the SEND Alliance does is allow us to have one contract, one performance framework, shared success, shared coordination, but most importantly, risk sharing across our system. And actually, this framework allowed us to draw upon our local care organisation, a wide range of partners, including health and adults, but sitting them alongside our parent carer community to actually identify what a governance structure needed to look like. And you can't really see these slides. They do need to be a bit bigger, but you can see that parent carer voice is wrapped around that. We have parents on our SEND Alliance, which is made up of senior leaders across our system, and we have chairs of our various groups that are paid roles as parent carers as well. And this allowed us to kind of wrap up a gift that we gave to the system with a really coordinated, clear vision. But we needed to think about, what do we need to deliver now? We've got our governance structure in place, so what do we need to deliver? We co-produced our vision, so this exercise is really helpful if you're looking at developing a vision, and it's really simple. So basically it's who will be impacted by the change and who needs to be part of it, shared, what unites us, and purpose, what matters to us. And if you ask those 3 questions of anything, you get that collective feedback in, then you come up with a really clear vision that's shared and owned. It might need a bit of refinement, but basically you're on your way. So our vision for Rochdale is that our borough will be a great place to grow up for all. We want a system that meets the needs of our children and young people with SEND and disabilities from birth to 0 to 25 to improve their outcomes. We want a system that promotes inclusivity, builds resilience, works together across education, health and social care, and which meets the needs of children early without unnecessary bureaucracy and delay. So that was the start. The next thing we needed to do was understand what it was that we needed to change. Now, this is not rocket science, and it's really simple way of capturing the outcomes for your system, but it does take time. As Amanda said earlier, it seems simple, but it does take time. You need to invest that energy, and you need to revisit this until you get it right. So we listened. We commissioned the Council for Disabled Children to do some independent consultation. We spoke to over 100 people, including children and families, to what actually mattered to them. We heard what they said. We checked in with that. We developed some I statements from that. We took them back to children and families and asked, is this what you meant? They changed some of them. We listened, and then we've got our kind of draft outcomes that Carol will talk to in more detail in a minute. So we got it right. It took time, but we got it right. So here's an example of a couple of our outcomes. We'll just briefly talk to the changes that we made. Carol.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, I think Rachel and Kenton did a really comprehensive description earlier of a co-production process, and this is one that we followed when we did the outcomes. It's really interesting, really, how as we said, how different parent carers and children and young people's views are sometimes on the same subject with the same aim. So if we just look at a couple of the outcomes, because we ended up with 7 for our Raising Rochdale strategy. So one of the outcomes that we came up with, having had some conversations, was my voice is heard. And underpinning this was voice to be heard in whatever form of communication, being listened to and acknowledged, being heard, having a say in my own life, having choices, sometimes being allowed to take risks. And this was the most important outcome for a lot of the children and young people. And the majority of parent and carers also felt this was a big outcome. But I think one of the things that we learned about this quite early on is about language. Language is really important for all of us. It's very important for parent carers, but I think it's even more important for children and young people, because we can say exactly the same thing and they hear something different. So we talked quite a lot through what does that actually mean? My voice is heard, and there were some comments about, maybe not everybody talks, communication is a different way. And it was really important for children and young people to be allowed to take risk. I think as parent carers, we often wrap our children and young people up in cotton wool, and it can be tricky for us to go down that journey as well. So there were lots of discussions backwards and forwards with the children and young people, and then they agreed as a collective that the final outcome would be my opinions are valued, which is slightly different to my voice is heard. Another outcome was I'm safe and supported. Having access to food and clothing, being free from poverty, adequate housing, being safe at home and school, having support from understanding adults who are aware of my needs, having a stable home. This was also a really, really important priority for a lot of the children and young people we spoke to. Many of our children with SEND don't often feel this, and I think it's a huge thing that we all should be able to feel. And as parent carers, obviously that was extremely high on our agenda. It's one of the main things that we all worry about, what's going to happen when we're not here, what happens to our children when they're out in the community. So there was quite a lot of discussion with the children and young people. And in the end, the outcome that they decided would be better for them would be I am safe and supported at home, at school and in the community. So as I said, those were just a couple of the outcomes in our 7 outcomes that were based on what children and young people in our borough told us were really, really important to them. So we have my opinions are valued, I'm emotionally well, I'm as healthy as possible, I'm safe and supported at home, at school and in the community, I'm active and involved, I'm helpful, hopeful and prepared for the future, and those that care for me are supported.
Thanks, Carol. Okay, so lots of words on here again. I'm going to try and speed us up. So once you've identified your outcomes, it's really important that you understand what you need to do to achieve those outcomes. We used the logic model. Again, we worked with the Council for Disabled Children to get some structure around this, and we looked at what are our enablers, what do we have that's required to support the change, our activities, what do we need to do to get there, our outputs, what are the tangible products or resources that we're going to produce, and our outcomes, how will we know that we're delivering safe, quality and effective care. And you'll see when you do see the slides, there's quite a lot of detail in here. So the output of this piece of work, again, co-produced, again, it took quite a lot of time for us to get there. It was ratified, we went back to it, and then we finally agreed. So the outcome of that is that we have got a plan on a page, which is our strategy on a page. That has also been co-produced with families. Families have co-produced the images. We did have some to-ing and fro-ing with our communications team who wanted us to have a corporate model, although we've said that this isn't owned by the local authority. This is a joint piece of work and it's owned by our families. So we really stood our ground with that, and we continue to share it. So outcomes are just the start. What we basically agreed, again, not rocket science, that children and families should be at the heart of decisions. They should have a smooth journey to support. There should be clear training for families and for workforce, and people should get the right help at the right time. And it's really clear. You can see on one page what we are working towards. We agreed that we would have some spotlights. So actually, if we want to turn the curve with this, if we want to make the biggest impact, what are the 2 things that are going to make the biggest difference for Rochdale? Now, our spotlights are that children will stay in school, so they won't be excluded, there will be high attendance, they'll be supported to remain within the local school community, and that children will stay in Rochdale. So this is around sufficiency of the market, making sure that we've got enough care for children when they do need care in Rochdale, and making sure that wherever possible, children are kept within schools within our local area. And actually, if you can keep your child in school and you can keep your child close to home, then that's the right thing to do for all children. So we always come back to this if we're having difficult conversations with our kind of peers, with our partners, because actually if a child's close to community and family, then that is the most important thing to do. Unless there's exceptional reasons, it should never be a first decision. So you've got your strategy, you've got your outcomes, you understand what you need to do, but then you need to measure them. You need to be able to evidence that impact, and we know that the new SEND inspection framework focuses on impact. So we have developed an outcomes framework, and we utilised this model, the turning the curve outcomes-based accountability framework, to think about what were the things that we needed to measure. Now this slide is there just for your own reference if you wanted a tool to do that. This is our outcomes and indicator framework, and it basically breaks down the outcomes and says how much have we done, how well have we done it, and what difference have we made. So how much have we done is quantity, how well have we done it is quality, and what difference have we made is impact. So I'll just give you one example of how we measure that. The detail I said is on the slide, but there's a lot on there. So for example, I'm emotionally well. How do we know that our children and families are emotionally well? Well, we look at quantity, we look at access, we look at numbers, we look at the number of our services that we're delivering and how children are engaging with those services, and we want to see that increasing. So our access to mental health services, for example, needs to continue to go up. When we're looking at quality, that's how well have we done it? So what do questionnaires say after children have been to our services? What do they report them to be like? What do mystery shoppers say about our services? What do audits suggest about our services? And all that is really clearly defined in the middle box with regards to how we'll measure quality. There's lots of indicators in there. These are just some suggestions. And with regards to impact, we know, don't we, when we're trying to gather evidence, we get scrappy little case studies here, there and everywhere. We've got no way of quantifying them. And we needed a framework to focus on, right, what do we need audits on? What do we need case studies on? How are we going to collect that information? And this really aligns that to our outcomes. So for children's mental health, I'm emotionally well, we would have case studies of where children in vulnerable groups might have access to support and it's made a real difference. And of course, the goal-based outcomes that children's mental health services use, how well have children progressed to their goal-based outcomes, because that is an impact measure. So there's lots of examples in there, but that's just one. Over to you, Carol.
Right, I'm going to go through this really quickly because obviously it's there in front of you on the slide and we are running short of time. But as I said earlier, right at the beginning, we have really regular, open and honest and transparent conversations with our heads of service. Parents and carers are involved at every step of strategic planning. We have lots of really good projects that we have bid for, submitted and now lead as parent carers within the authority. I noticed earlier there were some questions about some of our underserved communities. You know, how do we help support them? And we were really successful in a bid with our LCO to actually specifically look at those underserved communities. We have an independent parent carer chair on our SEND stakeholder group, keeping it real, we call it. You know, and we're there to make sure that SEND is everybody's business. That is our ethos and value in Rochdale. So there's lots of really good stuff going on. I mean, if anybody wanted to ask any more questions, you know, you can get in touch, but the slide's there. So I'll let Charlotte finish.
Okay, so at the next steps on our journey, we will be developing a SEND integrated advice line that will have parent carers on there. So that will be a front door, walking, talking local offer. We've kind of spec'd that up and we'll be delivering that next year. We'll be integrating our therapies, co-designing with our VCSE sector how we support children who might be thinking about a referral to therapy or might be on waiting lists. We're going to test that change. We need to rebalance our short break system, which we'll be redesigning over the next year. We need to deep dive into our alternative provision. We'll be reviewing SEND transport. We have received 2 million capital funding to develop a learning disability and autism children's home, which we're very excited about. We'll be integrating our targeted specialist support within local authority, and we need to do lots of work around educational sufficiency. So we've still got an awful lot to do, but we know now what it is that we need to do. And this quote that I've put in there, so it says, as well as mopping up on the floor, we also need to start turning down the taps. Everything we do in Rochdale, my philosophy is around early intervention, prevention wherever possible. And actually that's what people want. People want to be able to manage, they want to be able to cope. So we need to think differently around the way in which we are designing our services. So this is my final slide, and I want to just say we're not perfect in Rochdale. We are worried about the call as much as anybody else. This is all in place, but we need to implement now, and we actually need to make a difference for all families living in Rochdale. But I began to reflect upon success. Sometimes I feel a bit of a fraud sat here because what we've done, again, like I said, isn't rocket science, and we were so proud to be nominated for the Children and Young People's Award and to actually win it. It was probably one of the proudest moments in my entire life. So I just want to say something about the success of you all and what you're all delivering, and just to leave you with this message. The contact details will be at the end. So I'm going to read a poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson. To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics, and to endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a little better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition. To know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is the meaning of success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte and Carol. That was really, and what a lovely way to end. There are lots of amazing things in the chat, and I wish we had longer for both you and for the Bristol presentation. But I just wondered, Amanda, can I put you on the spot? Is there anything you've seen in the chat that you think we should bring out for Charlotte and Carol? So, because our next presenter, Philippa, is from CDC, and we can take 5 minutes, I think, here if there's anything specific in the chat to pull out.
I wondered whether both Charlotte and but also Mark and the team wanted to say any more. There was a question in the chat, and sorry, I'm just trying to sort of scroll back to find it, which was really about sorry, let me see if I can find it, which was really about how you engage with, or how you've gone about engaging with harder to reach families. And I know somebody from sort of Contact said something about that, but yeah, anything that Charlotte or Mark might have to add to that.
Do I go first?
Yes, please, Charlotte.
I don't think we've got it right yet. We try. So we work very closely with our VCSE organisation, and we have an umbrella organisation. So I ask them to coordinate grassroots gatherings for me, where we do deep dives into specific themes. And they then have to reach out to our communities, our harder to reach communities, and represent the voice and feed that back to their grassroots communities. So that has been really effective, and actually we've found some really amazing assets-based delivery around SEND that's happening that we never knew was happening, that we've been able to commission and support. We of course continue to engage with young people. We need to develop this area, which is an ambition of mine for the next 6 months. We've set up something called Youth Watch, which is made up, it's like a mini health watch for young people, which we commission. I think the main thing really is investing in your VCSE sector. Actually, you know, financially invested in them, valuing them, treating them as equal partners, because they are that reach to your harder to reach communities. And we could always do better with this. We're never going to reach everybody, but we always need to try. And I think with regards to intersectionality that we mentioned earlier, it's realising that actually some people need more support than others to share their voice, so they need further investment. So it's being creative with the way in which you target your resources, utilising your data, looking at equality impact assessments, understanding who isn't accessing your provision, and then going from there.
And I imagine that your evaluation helps you know who you are reaching, so you can then target better. Mark, anything from you that would help? How have you done it?
Well, not very well, I suppose, is the honest answer. We are working on it, and coincidentally, the workshop this afternoon is around that. Actually, what we've done in Bristol is a community of groups, which will link together with how the parent carer forums are working. But I agree with what Charlotte was saying about we've got to invest in it, because it just doesn't happen by accident. You've actually got to invest to actually meet as many of those kind of groups of people as possible.
Could I just add, if that's okay, from the
Please do, Rachel.
Forum? Brilliant. So, you know, Mark and the ICB do fund us to try and reach as many families as possible. And so what we do in our area and North Somerset and Bristol is we try to engage families by putting on different events to attract them. So today, for example, we're running a group for families that have disabilities themselves, just to focus on their needs. And we often find that we have to build trust with our families first for them to truly open up and engage with us, because they don't just want to come along and just offload all the time. They want to know what we're going to do with their voices. So it's about building links, networking. We had a question about the traveller community. We built links with our local authority, and they helped us to meet a couple of parents in that group. But I'm not going to lie, it's really challenging. It's a lot of work for forums to do that. So I just wanted to let you know that that's how we try.
Thanks, Rachel, and I think everybody here on this call and looking at the chat knows that this is a journey, and that, as Charlotte just said, no one's going to get it perfectly right, but it's long as we're sort of learning as we go. And also, I just want, before I introduce Philippa, I loved seeing in the chat how the ripple effect is working. So Rochdale's inspired Telford, is inspired Islington, and I'm sure many, many more. That's the way this will really become a systemic change across the country. Can I then introduce Philippa Watts from the Council for Disabled Children, who's going to talk more briefly than she'd been prepared for. So thank you, Philippa, for being flexible, but we've got opportunities to promote this through CDC anyway. But Philippa, over to you to talk about co-production work in local areas.
Thank you very much, Anna. Many of you on this call will have met me in the past, either through the DBOT contract in the last few years, or you're working with us on RISE now. But if you haven't, I am the programme lead for the health team at the Council for Disabled Children, but I'm also training and intervention lead for the RISE partnership. RISE, I know Amanda mentioned it right back at the beginning of this session, but RISE is the DFE funded support to local areas around implementing the SEND reforms, and obviously co-production is a key element of that. It's not just us at CDC, it's our partners at NDTI as well, but I've got this job as co-production sits with my team. Thanks, Miri. I'm just going to go through quickly some of the work that we are doing around co-production, and you have some great opportunities to hear more detail from some of the areas who we've been working with in the workshops as well. So I'll give a nod to those as I go through. But when we are approached through the RISE partnership for work around co-production, the sort of the key things that we see people are struggling with are, A, we don't have a co-production charter, or we've got one and we're not using it to its fullest extent to actually really drive our work. To go that step further, it's saying, okay, we've got a picture, perhaps we've got some nice words and a nice poster, but actually, are we really using it in the way that our speakers this morning have spoken to us about? So are we using it to drive our strategic planning? Are we really working on our services and pathways? And are we really using the voices of all of our partners to understand what's going on and what things look like, right down to that individual level? Are we hearing the voices of children, young people and parent carers in things like the EHCP process and further afield? The other thing we get brought in for is when there are really fractured relationships between partners, and we're not even at a point where we can have that co-production charter and that approach. We just sort of started to mend those relationships and share those experiences. So those are the kinds of things that come to us, and what do we do about them? There are lots and lots of different things we can do. The RISE partnership is very flexible. It's not a menu of support. We will always respond to what it is that local areas want and need, but this is just some things for you to think about that might be useful for you. So when we're thinking about strategic partnerships, we can lead some really very introductory, very gentle conversations about co-production that start with how do we want to feel when we come together and work together? What do we want to experience? How do we want to work in partnership? Can we heal some of the issues in the past that are holding us back from moving forwards? We can do a piece of work around co-production charters, so either starting from scratch or taking what you already have and refreshing it so it's really useful and meaningful and can really drive change forward. We can do some work around actually, if you've got that document, how do we make that live and breathe? How do we work with all our different partners across the system to understand what that means for me and what that means for my team and my role and my service and so on, so I can really take that and embed that in my day-to-day work. We do quite a bit around monitoring and evaluation co-production. So saying, how do we hold ourselves to account? How can we really evidence that we are working in partnership, either so when, you know, the SEND inspection comes calling, we've got that data, but actually so we can tell ourselves and tell each other, celebrate what's going on, learn from what we can do better and move forward. There's been a really interesting piece of work with Wirral, and those of you who've got the opportunity to talk to Wirral partners in the workshops later will hear more about this. But we've been working with them to develop their own in-house co-production training so they can go away and say, this is our approach, this is what co-production means in Wirral. Let's go and roll that out across our partners. Some really, really exciting work there. Thanks, Miri. And then at that more sort of operational level, we have some work around data voice and commissioning. We can do workshops on that, but there's also some training running on that is open for access. That's about understanding how pathways can be driven and services can be driven by precisely the journey that colleagues already have spoken to us about, having that clear vision, understanding what that means for the service or pathway, understanding how we may change to meet that. I've mentioned data already. Oh, sorry, Mary, we can just go back a sec. I've mentioned data already, but really strengthening that qualitative data and understanding that voice, and how do we take those stories and those individual experiences and make them into something that is really manageable and meaningful in the way that Charlotte mentioned about how do we tell that story about our partnership. We can also do work on specific pathways, and we've got a number of people who are giving workshops together who we've supported. So I will tip my hat to the Derbyshire team, and thank you, Chris, for replying to my email about a further conference. But some interesting work there about how we work with children and people and families to drive pathways forward. At the individual level, working with those individuals who take responsibility and have a role in hearing the voices of children, young people and parent carers. So we've been asked by a number of local areas if we can work with SEN case officers to build their skills and confidence around facilitating EHCP conversations and annual reviews to make sure that we're hearing those children and young people. How do we communicate with families in the course of that EHCP process? How do we make sure we're touching base with them at the right point and using that in the right way so everyone feels up to date and part of the journey? And I've mentioned annual reviews already. We've got some e-learning on annual reviews too. Just spotted Steph's question in the chat. CDC is part of RISE rather than RISE as part of CDC. It's one of our programmes, but we are in partnership with NDTI to deliver RISE. I've got 2 minutes. What have we learned so far? So here it is. I've mentioned some of the challenges, and these are things that we hear from not just from parent carer reps, but also from our colleagues in the local authority and in health. We're seeing fractured relationships, and what helps is coming together and making sure we've got shared expectations. People have already mentioned vocabulary and terminology. differing definitions of co-production is a real barrier right at the beginning. If you don't share that understanding of actually what do we mean when we say we're working in co-production, that's when you start, you're onto a losing streak at the start. Because if I say, oh, we worked in co-production around this, and someone says, actually, no, you didn't, that was consultation, we haven't got that shared understanding. Lack of clear structures. Actually, what are the mechanisms? Who are we talking about? Who are we working with? Who do we have contact with? Do we have that understanding of who is out there and how we can build these relationships with our children, young people and families? A lot of people have mentioned perceived lack of action. Change at this level is slow, really slow and challenging and difficult. We've had lots of conversations with local areas about how do we start to demonstrate change and how do we talk about change when it's not happening and it's not going to be felt on the ground for a year, 2 years, 3 years. So we've talked to local areas about moving from you said we did to we said we did, therefore, and this is the anticipated change we see. But also, how do we share that data? How do we share that evidence? How do we tell our story of change really proactively, not just to our families, but also to our workforce? A couple of people have mentioned that this is a really daunting task. There is a lot to do. We cannot work on everything with a blank piece of paper all the time. We would love to do that. It's not practical. So can we identify co-production priorities? Where are we going to put our energy and our resources and our time? Where is going to make the biggest difference if we really come together and work effectively? What can we do now? What can we do next year? What can we do in the future? Let's identify those priorities nice and early on. This is my last slide, so I've brought us back to time. If this has sparked any thoughts, apologies, it's been a lightning tour. If this has sparked any thoughts, you can talk to your DfE case lead or SEND advisor about how you might access the support through the RISE programme. That is funded support. You then have a conversation with me about how we go ahead with that. I will just a quick plug that we can also be commissioned directly, as we have been by Rochdale and others. Sam's email is up there. Sam's new, he may not be expecting these emails, but we will have a conversation about that in the background. And yes, presentations will be shared. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Philippa, and congratulations for pulling us back in. Just a couple of the last things from me, which is don't forget that we are breaking right now to join again at 12 for the first of your workshops, and then there'll be a 10-minute break between the second of your workshops. And please, please, please fill in the evaluation form, because while I think CDC, Amanda, Miri, everyone here has done a brilliant job, I know we can always do better, and we'd like to learn from you all today. Amanda, any last words from you before we say goodbye?
No, thank you so much, Anna, for chairing, and thanks to everybody as usual for coming along. You know, these events are as good as they are because of your input and your engagement with them. So and we know how busy you are, so we're just always grateful that you prioritise the time to be here.
Excellent. So we'll take a quick break and see you in the workshops. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to all our speakers in particular.
Thank you, everyone.
Love a wave. And I can see Mark's on hold. Is I was going to say thank you to him, but he's obviously just joined the other meeting rather than leaving this one.
Do we need to physically leave this one in order to join the others?
You don't have to, but you might as well. Have you signed up for a workshop, Anna?
I think I have, but I'm just going to check. I will leave this meeting so that I can take a natural break, Amanda, and be ready to join.
I think that's perfectly reasonable, Anna.
Goodbye, everybody.